Okay, now that I have my backpack back attached to my zipper strip, I have my prepared bias binding and I have pinned it every 4 to 6 inches just to keep it from twisting. So I am ready to attach it on now. So you can clip this with Wonder Clips if it's helpful. I like to keep it pulled pretty, not too tight, but a little bit tight, just so that the extra fullness from the bias rolls nicely around when you're rolling your binding around. But I'm just gonna just pull it as I sew it on. One thing I love about Soft and Stable is the bag is quilted with Soft and Stable. It's just very pliable when you're sewing your bag together, so you can kind of just smash it right out of the way and it keeps its shape when you're done sewing. So I usually leave a tail, so I can attach these easily. So I'm going to grab a Wonder Clip. I like to clip this in place so I know where to make my markings to trim my binding to match. So I'm going to clip that in place, and then I'm going to be marking. I'll refer to this as the bottom binding. This is the top binding. The top binding and the bottom binding each have a bottom and a top that correspond to each other. So the bottom and the top of the bottom binding, the bottom and the top of the top binding. And we want to mark these 2 points on our top binding so we know where to match up our bindings. So I'm going to just pull out these pins and reuse them here. So right where that point is on that bottom binding, I'm going to match it on my top bottom binding right there. And then I'm going to do the same thing with this one, with this other binding point. Right here. Okay, and then I always want to check my angle to make sure that it's correct. So I open up this binding and put them how they would be sewn, and the angle is correct. You just want to double check that. So now I need to trim this, and I'm going to add a 1/2 inch onto these 2 points because that's my seam allowance. We're going to take a 1/4 inch seam allowance, but we can't make this one magically grow a 1/4, so we're just going to add both the seam allowances on this side, 1/4. So we're going to add a 1/2 inch on this side, so I'm going to trim that. So now that I've trimmed that, I'm going to match these up and sew them together. So I like to use my pins to keep this together because sometimes it's because you're pulling it tight together, it makes it easier. All right, so you leave your 1/4 inch dog ears on each side so that you can get your nice 1/4 inch seam. So now I have that all seamed together. I'm going to open up this seam allowance and I'm going to finger press it. I also have my by Annie Stiletto pressing tool I like to use to finger press that seam open. And then you're just going to finish attaching that binding around your backpack back. And if it's helpful to put your clips back on, feel free. Just keep it all lined up. All right, so now that I have that attached, I'm just gonna pull it around and I am going to stitch it down. If, for instance, you have extra bulk in your seam allowances, you can always trim that down with scissors to trim out that extra bulk. And my favorite tool to use when I'm doing binding is my By Annie Stiletto. So I have that here. It helps keep this binding in place and helps pull it over. Now I have my binding all sewn. We're just going to flip this inside out. Stay tuned for the next video. We're going to share how to attach the backpack strap adjusting hardware to complete our backpack to make adjustable straps.